Hilchos Shegagos Perek Arba Asar, the laws of sacrifices for inadvertent transgressions, chapter 14. We're continuing the subject of the court that issues an erroneous ruling and therefore has to bring a sin offering for its ruling, and all the individuals who acted on their word are exempt. As the Rambam told us in chapter 12, in order for this special law to take place, 9 conditions have to be met. If all 9 boxes are checked, then the court carries the responsibility and not the people. But if any of the 9 conditions are missing, then the court does not carry the responsibility, and every individual who acted on the court's ruling has to themselves bring a sin offering to atone for their sin. 7 of the conditions were elaborated upon yesterday, and today we get the other 2. What are the last 2 conditions? The last 2 conditions are that the court, in their erroneous ruling, has to have canceled only part of a mitzvah while preserving the other part of it. If they completely cancel out one of the mitzvahs, then they're exempt. That's not called an erroneous ruling, that's simply a mistake. Erroneous ruling means within a mitzvah, you canceled part and left the other. But if you cancel it completely, they don't carry any responsibility, the people carry the responsibility. The second one is that when the court finds out about the mistake, they have to also know the nature of their mistake. They can't just find out that they made a mistake, they have to know what the mistake was. And these 2 conditions will be elaborated upon in today's chapter. It says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Beis Din Shegagos. The High Court, the Court of 71 Judges, acts inadvertently, v'hoiru lakar guf migufei Torah, and they issue a ruling which uproots one of the bodies of the Torah. It completely cancels one of the mitzvahs. V'asu kol ha'am al piyem, and the entire nation of Israel acts on their word. Beis Din pturin. Actually, the court will be exempt. V'chol echad ve'echad min ha'isim chayav chatas kavua, and every one of the people that acted on their words is liable to bring their own standard sin offering. Shenemar, because it says in the verse which describes this unique case of the court's sacrifice, it says that one of the conditions is v'nelam davar, right over here. A thing needs to be forgotten to the court. That means only one thing, v'loi kol haguf, not an entire entity. If an entire mitzvah is forgotten, the court doesn't carry liability. Now, the Rambam sort of restates this in the next halacha, but also introduces another element to this. Besides for the fact that the court cannot simply cancel out the observance of a mitzvah, they also cannot cancel out any element of a mitzvah which is explicit in the Torah. Canceling out a part of a mitzvah which is clear in the Torah is just like canceling out the entire mitzvah. That's going to be the point of what's coming now. Halacha beis la'olam ein beis din chayavin. Always, the High Court is never liable ad sheyoru levatul miktsas ulekayim miktsas, until they rule to cancel out part of a mitzvah and to preserve the other part. But even that has to be bidvarim she'enan mefurashin b'Torah u'mevuarim, things, matters that are not explicit and clear in the Torah. Ve'achar kach yu beis din chayavin bekarban, and only then will the High Court be liable to a sacrifice v'ha'esim al piyam pturim, and those who act by their word will be exempt. But if it's something that's clear in the Torah, even if it's only part of a mitzvah, it's just like canceling the entire mitzvah, and the court doesn't carry responsibility. As the Rambam proceeds to give a bunch of examples for this. Ketzat, what does this look like? Shagagu v'hoiru. The court makes a mistake, and they issue a ruling, shemuter lihishtachavos la'avodah zara, that it's permitted to bow down to idols. Now, idol worship is a general umbrella mitzvah. But they picked one part of that mitzvah, but it's a part which is explicit in the Torah. Torah says clearly no bowing down to idols. Or they said it's permitted to transfer from one domain to another on Shabbos. Again, keeping Shabbos with all of its 39 labors is one big umbrella mitzvah. But this one specific labor is clear in the Torah. Out of all 39, this is the only one that's explicit in the Torah, carrying. And they want to cancel this labor. It's allowed to transfer from domain to domain. Or they said, shemuter lavai al shemeres yom keneged yom, that it's permitted to have relations with a woman who is keeping one day opposite one day. What does this mean? So, in the laws of forbidden relationships, we learned that one of the women you cannot have relations with is a nida, a woman on her monthly period. That's the regular time for sighting. What if a woman experiences an irregular blood flow, not during the expected period time? So if she only sees blood for one day, all she needs to do is shemeres yom keneged yom, guard one day clean to make up for this one day of sighting. Goes to the mikveh in the morning, hopes that the entire day will be clean of any other sightings, and if it is, she is permitted back to her husband. But during that day, when she is actually waiting for the clean day to pass, it's biblically forbidden to have relations with your husband, and it's clear in the Torah. So here they are, seemingly only canceling one part of a mitzvah, but it's a part of a mitzvah which is clear in the Torah. Therefore, says the Rambam, Harei elu kimisha amru, in all these three scenarios, it's just as if they may have said, Ein Shabbos b'Torah, or Ein Avodah Zarah b'Torah, or Ein Nida b'Torah. Shabbos doesn't exist in the Torah. Idol worship doesn't exist in the Torah. Nida, the whole law of menstruating women, doesn't exist in the Torah. Sha'akru kol haguf, where they would have canceled the entire entity. Saying these things, even though it seems like only a part of it, is also considered like canceling the entire entity. This, or anything like it, is not called an erroneous ruling, it's just called forgetfulness. Therefore, the court is exempt from a sacrifice. Anybody who acts on their word is liable to a sin offering on their own. But let's consider the following cases, where they're splitting hairs within these categories. If the court makes a mistake and gives the ruling, and they said, when somebody transfers from one domain to another, that's where they are liable. Because it says in the Torah, a person shall not move from his place, meaning you shouldn't go out from one domain to another while carrying an object. But what if somebody throws from one domain to another, where he's not going out of his place, he stays in his original place, or he passes something over the wall into the next domain, again, he's staying in his place. So they say mutter, that's permitted. So now we have an interesting erroneous ruling. They're acknowledging what it says in the Torah, that you cannot transfer from one domain to another domain. They're preserving the core commandment here, but they're just saying that only the literal meaning is what's forbidden, but not other things like throwing and passing. Or they uprooted any of the other primary forms of labor that are not explicit in the Torah. Unlike carrying. Carrying before was one example where it's considered like uprooting the entire entity, because carrying is clear in the Torah. But the other ones are not clear in the Torah. So if they say that any of the other 39 forms of labor don't exist, and they rule that it's not considered work, they are considered liable. Because in this case, they have uprooted part of a mitzvah and preserved another part of a mitzvah, and it's all being done in matters that are not explicit in the Torah. And therefore, the court carries liability. Similarly, let's go back to the idol worship case. If they made a mistake and they said, yes, we know it says you can't bow to idols, but that only means if somebody bows down to idol worship with complete prostration of the hands and feet, that's where you're liable. Because the Torah says, no bowing to other gods. And bowing in the Torah, hishtachava, means complete prostration. But if somebody were to simply kneel on the ground without prostrating his hands and feet, that's allowed. Now we have an erroneous ruling again, because they've preserved the core of the mitzvah, and they made an erroneous, they've made an error in the interpretation or the full application of that. So they're liable. Same thing with the third case. If they made a mistake and they said, when does the Torah hold somebody liable if they have relations with a woman who's guarding a clean day opposite an impure day? That's only if she had originally seen the blood by day. Because it says in the verse, Kol yemei zoiva, all the days of her irregular blood flow. But if she experiences the sighting by night, then it's permitted to have relations with her. So again, preserving part of it, canceling the other part of it. This would be an example of a liability. Or if they said, they ruled and said, that if somebody's wife becomes a menstruating woman during relations, it's permitted to withdraw while erect, as we saw earlier in the set of laws. That's actually forbidden. But they wanted to permit this action. They are liable, because again, they've preserved the core of the mitzvah, only canceled another part of it that's not clear in the Torah. Or if they made a mistake and they said that only eating blood which emerges during the actual slaughtering, that's where you're held liable from the Torah. But if you eat to eat the blood that gathers in the heart, it's permitted. They're liable. Same thing applies in all similar scenarios, similar mistakes. If they rule and most of the community follows them, they're exempt, the people, and the court has to bring the sacrifice for their inadvertence, because again, they've uprooted part and preserved part. Halacha Gimel, an interesting case. The court gives out the ruling and they say, guys, Shabbos is over. but it was a mistaken premise. The sun was covered, and they thought that the sun set. And then the clouds parted, and boom, it's the middle of the day. This is actually a picture. It's called a fake sunset. It looks like a sunset, but it's actually not. The way the clouds form, it looks like the sun is below the horizon, but it's actually not yet. So what do we call that? Ein zu hayra elato. Same thing. That's not called a ruling. That's just called a mistake. It's a physical mistake. They misassessed the situation. And in that scenario, anybody who does work thinking that it's no longer Shabbos will be liable on their own, and the court would be exempt. Same thing if the court allows a married woman to get married, because two witnesses came and testified that her husband is dead. And then it's revealed that they were wrong. Then her husband shows up. Retroactively, it's not considered to be a ruling. It's a mistake. And the woman with her new husband, for any time they had relations together, are liable to bring a sin offering over their inadvertent act. The same thing applies in all similar situations where you weren't aware of the facts. That's not called an erroneous ruling, that's simply called a mistake. Halacha Dalid. Now we turn to the last of the conditions. The idea of having to become aware of the nature of their mistake. Beis Din shahiru bishgaga. High court issues a ruling inadvertently, and they forget what was the nature of the sin which they ruled about. They know for sure that they actually sinned inadvertently. They know that there was a mistake. Even though, furthermore, the people are reminding them. And the people are saying, this is the ruling that you gave us. If they don't remember it, they're exempt. And whoever acts by their word is liable on their own. Because it says, going back to that verse, the sin which they sin has to become known. It has to become known by them, not that it's made known to them by the sinners. What's an example of this? Ketzad. They made a mistake and they permitted the fat that's above the digestive system to be eaten. And most of the people ate it based on their words. Later on, the court finds out that there was an erroneous ruling here. They know that they permitted something which would usually carry the penalty of excision or a sin offering if done by mistake, but they don't remember what it was. They became doubtful whether they had permitted a portion of the fats to be eaten or bloods to be eaten. They are exempt, and whoever eats has to bring a standard sin offering for himself because the court doesn't remember on their own the nature of the sin which they ruled about. Halacha hey, Beis Din shahiru bishgaga. Let's say the court issued an erroneous ruling and they found out their error. They remember what it was. Whether or not they had yet brought their sacrifice. Here's the picture of the sacrifice that was brought, right, one for each tribe. Whether or not they had already brought the sacrifice, but the sin was already found out, anybody who then goes ahead and follows the ruling, once they already found out, he has to bring for his own atonement a doubtful guilt offering. Even though he could say that he blames it on the ruling and he never heard about the fact that the court found out, he's still living in the pre-finding out reality. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, a wonderful concept. Since the Jew, as a responsible Jew, should have asked around all the time to find out things that are coming out from the court new, and he didn't ask, he's considered like a person who's in doubt whether he sinned or not. As a responsible, orthodox, religious Jew, you have an obligation to be updated on what's happening in the Jewish courts. And you didn't find out. So, you require some form of atonement. But says the Rambam, when do we require this atonement? If you were in the same province, region as the court. But let's say you were in the region when the court gave out the ruling. Then you travel to a different region. Then even if you kept on doing the sin after the court found out, you're exempt. Because you originally hung your hat on the court, and now you can no longer find out because you're out of town. Not only that, so somebody was in a rush to get out of the country. He was on the way to the trip. Even if he didn't begin traveling yet. And he performs the sin based on the words of the court after they already found out. He's exempt, because once you're on the way out of the country, it's like you're already out of the country. You can't focus on finding out the new updates on what's happening in the courts, and therefore you're not held liable in those scenarios.